And recording started.
Okay, thank you. I'm Maureen Toms, and I am the vice chair of WCCT, and I'd like to call this meeting to order. Can we have roll call, please?
Tiffany Grimsley,
Present.
Tom Hansen,
Here.
Cameron Sasai,
Here.
Aleda Chavez, running a little late, Deanna Bailey. Okay. And Maureen Toms, so sorry.
Here.
Okay.
And did you call for Maureen Powers also?
Maureen Power, sorry. Okay.
Okay.
And if I may, I'd just like to take a second to welcome our new director and our society. Welcome to the WCCT board. I know we had a quick conversation earlier in the week, so look forward to working more with you as we get acclimatized to the board.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. So will you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And I believe we have Maureen Powers joining us. Okay, next on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Can we have a motion?
Recording in progress.
I'll move to approve the agenda.
Okay, motion by Hansen. Is there a second?
I second the motion.
And second by Grimsley. Roll call vote, please.
Tiffany Grimsley,
Aye.
Maureen Powers,
Aye.
Tom Hansen,
Aye.
Maureen Toms,
Yes.
Cameron Sasai.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Next on the agenda is public comment public comment. Do we have anybody who has a comment on anything that's not on the agenda?
No.
Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to the consent calendar. Does anybody have any comments on consent calendar items? Or can we get a motion?
I move approval, consent calendar.
Second. I'll second.
I heard a first by Powers and a second by Hansen. And can I get a roll call vote?
Yes. We have Tiffany Grimsley,
Aye.
Maureen Powers,
Yes.
Tom Hansen,
Aye.
Maureen Toms,
Yes.
Cameron Sasai.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next on the agenda, we have items for board action or discussion. And we're going to start with item 2.1. That's a presentation and discussion of the first quarter financial and operating data report. And is that you, Deborah?
No, that will be fine.
Rob. Okay.
And I'm going to actually ask Rob to share the item on his screen so that I could kind of go through the statements. Okay. So as it says in the little write-up that Rob did on the staff report, that this item is a standard report that we do. The one that is in front of you right now is our income statement, which you would typically see at the end of the year. But I have recommended that as we go through our quarterly reports, we actually present the income statement with the quarterly reports because it has a breakdown of not only the functional categories, but by object class. So it is clearer than just the one system-wide summary, which you will see at the end of this item. And basically what this does is it is a representation of all of our expenses by functional class and by object class that occurred in the first quarter. This is representing July 1st, 2022 through September 30th, 2022. So this is the first quarter of our fiscal year. And it also represents the revenues. And what it compares to is the adopted budget. So what we would like to see is remaining in the expenses in the first quarter would be at least 75% of the budget remaining. And as you can see, if you look at just the very first functional category in operations, and you look at the last column, budget remaining, you will see that on the first line, as an example, outside services operations, you will see 83% remaining in the budget, which is good. And overall, for operations, you will see a total remaining of 76.4% of the budget remaining. So that's right where we would like to be at the first quarter, and actually a little bit better. And if Rob, could you scroll down a little bit? You will also see this, as well as non-vehicle maintenance. And non-vehicle maintenance is primarily having to do with our facilities, and also our IT is represented in this category. And I will point out in non-vehicle maintenance that there are two line items that you can see represented that are other materials and supplies. It's the second from the last item on that category. That is other materials and supplies non-vehicle maintenance. And then the one below it is other materials and supplies non-vehicle maintenance computers. And I will say that these are less than 75% remaining in this quarter. And in particular, I wanted to point these out because Rob Petty, our new facilities, IT, and maintenance manager, fleet manager, as he's taken over, has been in the process of replacing a lot of outdated equipment that we have on site. If you're familiar with us and our building, you'll know that the building is, I think it's about 40 years old. And so things are wearing down, and we're replacing them. As Rob has taken over the fleet maintenance portion, he's noticed that some of the equipment that the maintenance men, the utility workers, and the maintenance crew use are either in need of replacement or repair. So he's been doing a good job of taking care of that for us. And then we've also got a lot of new technologies that require some new computer equipment that he's also been replacing. So that's why those particular line items there are a little bit below the 75%. And then we have general admin, and that's the last functional category, which is representative of all of the transit authorities staff, with the exception of Rob Petty, who is actually classified in the other category above with his salaries and benefits. But this is a representation of all of the expenses for the general admin. And as you can see, all of them as well have at least 75% remaining. So we're in good shape in the first quarter, with a total of about 76% remaining in that category. Rob, can you scroll down for me? Okay, so these are actually the same expenses, but by object class, which gives you a breakdown of salaries versus benefits, the different functional categories. So you can see how that is laid out in a little bit more detail. And this is why I wanted to present this income statement to you along with the the other summary report, 10Q, that we have at the end. So if we'll scroll down a little bit, and if anybody sees anything that they'd like to ask questions about, feel free to, but I don't have anything in particular to point out there. The one thing that I will note is the fuel. And as you can see, the fuel, we're a little greater than 80% remaining in the budget. So we're looking good in the fuel line item. Purchase transportation is slightly under 75% remaining, and that is due to the one-seat ride purchase transportation line item that we actually did not include in the adopted budget. It is a pilot program, and this will be represented in the adjusted budget when we present that to you. So it will be more in line with the rest of the purchase transportation, and that is our MV contract expenses. Everything else, I think there, oh, Rob, can you stop right there for just a moment? And maybe scroll up just a little bit. Oh, you went too far, slightly too far. Those are, go just a few more pages. Okay, so in the other, other object, we're almost there. In the very last, there we go, other object class expenses. I just wanted to make a note that we have moved a couple of items into this particular category, which is the fees for admin, and the Clipper Shopify bank fees are also in this category. And previously we had them in outside services, and Deborah and I have talked it over, and Deborah recommended that we call out the fees as a separate line item. And so that created a new accounting code for those two classifications, and they are now under a different object class. So you see the 70.41% remaining in that class is because those two line items were not budgeted in that particular object class. They were budgeted in outside services. So that's why you see that there. And I just wanted to draw your attention to that briefly. And then, so these are all representations of our revenues in the first quarter, at the end of the first quarter. So I just wanted to mention with the revenues, with the budget remaining, the percentage you want to see there is that you've collected at least a quarter of the revenues. However, some we get all at once at the beginning of the year, and some we get as we use them. Some of the federal funds, we don't actually record them until we've actually used them, like state of good repair for capital expenditures. So these aren't always going to be in line with the way the expenses are. So don't be alarmed if you see a little under what we expect to collect, or we've actually collected more. In the case of passenger fares, we've actually budgeted $1 million, but we're actually collecting more fares at this point than what we had anticipated, which is a good thing in that area. I don't know if Rob wants to mention anything in the revenues or point out anything directly. Is there anything?
No, I don't think so. I think, as Yvonne said, I think we're on track with where we expect to be in terms of all the revenues. As Yvonne said, some of them come in. We're kind of used to knowing when they come in across the year. So where we stand right now is where we would expect to stand.
So question, just to be clear, I think it makes sense that these percentages, we don't want to be at 75%. We'd like them to be lower is better. Is that correct? Because that means we've gotten more in, we have less to collect.
That's
We're
right,
ahead of
right,
the
we
game.
have less.
Okay.
That's right. So if we,
Yeah.
so, well, yeah, exactly. You're correct. So in some
Okay.
cases, we have, if you see the 68% that we have in fares, that's a little bit under, which means that that's a good thing. We've actually collected more fares than we expected. And that is the case in probably the majority of the revenues that you see. In fact, I think mostly all of them.
It's great.
Thank you for your report, Yvonne.
You're welcome.
Before we go any further, I'd like to welcome Board Member Adreno Chavez, who has arrived. And are there any other questions or comments on the first quarter report? Okay, this item is for information only. So if there's no other questions, we'll thank you for the report and we'll move on to the next item, which is 2.2, and that's a presentation and discussion of MTC network management.
Sorry, I was just sharing my screen. So I know a number of you, and I don't know exactly how many of you attended this session earlier this afternoon at 4 o'clock by MTC gave to a set of board members for all the transit agencies. It was done as a webinar, so I wasn't able to see who was in attendance, but I know a few of you did request the link. So I'm kind of going to try and give a little summary of what was presented, and then perhaps the board members who were in attendance can, fill in any gaps, and then we can kind of answer any questions. But there is a staff report that kind of tried to outline where we are in this regional network management process and the business case that has just been kind of completed to come up with a regional network management framework to move forward on. I will say the presentation I'm going to use here is slightly different than one that was contained in your board packets, because this is a slightly more updated version that, again, as the other board members saw earlier today. So we'll just start with some background of what the regional network management is and how we got to where we are today. Back at the start of the pandemic, MTC set up a 32-member blue ribbon transit recovery task force, and that was given the task of helping transit get through everything that was going back at the start of the pandemic in terms of ridership loss, complete close down of service, everything that was going on, and all of the funding concerns. So that was an ongoing process with, say, 32 members on the task force made up of transit operator general managers, advocates, and MTC commissioners and other stakeholders. And that did a lot of work over the first year or so. And that culminated in the release of the Bay Area Transit Transformational Action Plan, which contains 27 near-term actions that were intended to help improve efficiency and improve the overall rider experience for anyone using any form of Bay Area transit throughout the 9-county region and any of the 27 transit operators. So there was, again, a lot of people really heavily involved, really coming up with a way to move forward to ultimately improve transit for the rider, for the end user. And I think everyone was on board with that task. There were some concerns, certainly from all of the operators on how we would get there. And you may remember back 3 years ago, one of our big concerns was consolidation. The small transit agencies all being commingled into one. And I'm pleased to say that was not how the business case and how this project played out. It took a pretty thoughtful approach to better ways to integrate and coordinate and improve transit throughout the Bay Area. So I think the only other thing to mention on this was one of the choose from the Bay Area Transit Transformational Action Plan was the setting up of a regional network manager. So again, this was pretty undefined back 2 years ago when it was first brought up, and no one really knew what that would mean. Would it mean a separate entity being created to oversee and ultimately dictate how transit operations existed throughout the whole 9 counties? And they did go through a pretty long and intensive business case to analyze. Move on to business case to analyze different approaches and different ways to set up a function throughout the region that could help guide us and help improve transit. Some of the things that came out of the project in the early days were a need to better coordinate between different transit agencies in terms of scheduling. And I think that all of the transit operators got on board with that very early on. We set up a number of subcommittees with planning staff, with general managers, with operations staff, on ways to just go about making some of those kind of improvements. And I think that the really big, huge one that came out of that was BART actually agreeing to sit down and streamline their own schedule and give all the smaller operators who connect to the BART system the updated schedule information 4 to 5 months in advance, so we could all plan around a date of when we would all change our schedule, so all kind of remain in coordination. Some of the other initiatives were fare coordination. It's kind of an ongoing approach now, where just using the Clipper system to make it much easier for somebody who has to travel between multiple transit agencies to be able to do so at a more affordable rate. So it's looking at how individual transit agencies set up transfer agreements with one another, how transfers between local service and regional service kind of all commingle together, and again, ultimately to make the system a little bit more seamless and friendly for the rider. So I think, again, we've all kind of been on board with all of that as we've gone through the process. So I think the 2 statements here, I've just kind of, they probably are worth stating. These kind of came out of the business case study, and these are probably going to roll up into how the regional network management ultimately kind of functions and serves the general public. So the proposed mission statement is to drive transformational improvements in the customer experience for regional Bay Area transit. And the proposed vision statement is to advance regional goals in equity, livability, climate, and resilience through a unified regional transit system that serves all Bay Area populations. The other thing that came up a number of times in the meeting today earlier was what this means for local transit versus regional transit and how that will ultimately be defined. I think there's many small operators out there that are essentially just local transit agencies. They just provide service to their local communities. And then there's much larger agencies that, the BARTs, the AC Transits, the communities of the world that are definitely regional transit agencies. And then there's agencies like ourselves that kind of do both functions. So I think there's us and the other Contra Costa operators, LABDA, certainly, and some of the Marin Transit transit agencies are very interested in how local and regional will be ultimately defined, because it's all very well for the region to play a role in how our regional trips into Del Norte BART station and how our trips into San Francisco are kind of served, but there's also a real importance that the local elected officials have a real ability to direct and implement how you want to implement service within your own communities. I say that because we have routes that serve both functions. Our routes into the Del Norte BART station have a local element and a regional element. So it is going to be interesting how that kind of plays out over the upcoming months as this system's set up. But the way the business case tried to at least start looking at that is it tried to say, would a regional entity would it make an improvement to the customer experience? Could it unlock efficiencies for the operators? And would it be feasible? And I think a lot of these are, self-explanatory, especially they improve their customer experience. But some of the efficiencies to think about are, could joint procurement transit vehicles help the region if we were purchasing a much larger number rather than individual agencies purchasing much smaller numbers? How we, again, to go back to how we coordinate schedules, how we do wayfinding and signage. I think there's a regional role to play in some of those functions that can help the smaller agencies in unlocking some of the time that we spend on some of these projects. If a regional entity can take them on, it can be beneficial. I think there's a balancing act there between a regional entity asking us to do more and putting more of a burden on local staff. But I think that's a conversation to be had as we kind of move forward. And then the final element is to be feasible. And this just gets into the operational efficiencies, if you like, and how operations actually work. And I think this just speaks to, this is why it made little sense to consolidate agencies, because it's not feasible for a trip that is just going to serve the area of Punole or the area of Hercules to be deadheading and to be housed and operationally and maintained in Oakland or in Concord or outside of the immediate area. So that was kind of where that part of it came to. So just one or two more slides I'm going to mention. This is the recommended framework that the MTC Commission will be voting on, how the regional network management structure will kind of be set up. It's a little hard to kind of explain without going into some of the details, but ultimately on this side, this is the ultimate setup of what the regional network management system would look like. It would be a director or somebody actually employed and a small number of staff that would be set up to start off the project. So the funding for this needs to be identified. MTC have some ideas of how this would be funded. It's everyone chips in a little bit and shares the load is the initial approach. So we will see how that plays out. But it's basically a new set of roles and staff within the MTC organization. So the MTC executive director has direct control over this section of the MTC staff who report to the MTC Commission. And then the rest of it is kind of all newly set up. So there would be a MTC Regional Network Management Committee, which would be a subset of the Commission, plus potentially a couple of transit board members who would be appointed to that committee. So they would be the ultimate governing body, if you like. And then the Regional Network Council is I like to think, well, a lot of the work will actually be done, a lot of the operational decisions, approaches will be made. It's planned to be made up of the operators, essentially the general manager operators, mainly of the large operators and a representative from the small operators. And I will say that this whole function here with the task force, with a subcommittee above them and with the MTC Commission is ultimately how we have been operating the Clipper system for the last number of years since we actually started making inroads into making the Clipper system more functional and usable. This is the exact setup that was set up. So it's a standard that's worked well within the MTC organization up to now. So the other element of this are the voice of the customers. This is the advisory committee. This is where stakeholders would have input into the decisions that were made. And then off to this side, it's just listed as transit boards. And I think there was a little bit of pushback in how this is represented at the earlier meeting. But I think the intent is to show that nothing can really happen, or individual transit agencies will always have the ability for their boards to opt out or to make decisions, or it's just a way to make sure that transit boards are acknowledged as part of the structure. And that, again, that just goes back to what's a regional decision and what's a local decision and how that's all going to coalesce over the upcoming years. So I think the only other slide I was going to share was the just the timeline. So this is something that is going to go to the full commission in January, and then the plan is that it will be adopted in February, and then that will be the start of MTC trying to employ or recruit a executive director for the regional network management, and then that would be the start of that entity and those individuals kind of working with the transit operators and working with the elected officials to figure out how to move some of these projects forward and these initiatives forward. So I don't know if anyone who was there wants to add anything, or if we just want to, anyone else just wants to add any general questions. I can stop sharing my screen and
Board Member Powers?
Yeah, I attended the webinar. I thought it was very, very interesting. And the ED of MTC, who's about to retire, by the way, at the end of this month, Therese, I don't remember her last name, I'm sorry. Thank you. Pointed out that they have the MTC group has basically been operating with this system so far. I mean, like Rob was saying, that it works they're using a system to coordinate Clipper usage, for example. One of the big concerns, and I have a concern too, is how this is going to be financed. So when it goes to the MTC for approval, I guess this week, maybe finally in February, what they'll be approving is not the final plan. They'll be improving this general approach. And then the goal for the next several months, and I've forgotten exactly what the timeline was. I think Rob probably just showed it and I just didn't pay attention. Sorry, Rob. The ultimate goal is to come up with an implementation plan. And that implementation plan is what will include how it's going to be funded. Now, several of the smaller operators expressed concern about that. Is it going to come out of our money? And if so, how is that going to be, apportioned across the various agencies? They really didn't have any answers for that at all. I believe that what they're doing is they're coming up with this very strong plan in order to try to get perhaps some additional funding, maybe from the state, maybe from other locations. And if they can show that they have this very strong plan in place, then perhaps we can get other money rather than having to rob Peter to pay Paul. I mean, that's probably a bad analogy, but that's what I think of. So I think that's a concern. I think we should watch how they're planning to finance this. They've got a whole new staff position at MTC, the regional network manager. That person has a staff, as you saw, probably it looks like 7 or 8 people. They all have to be paid. Right now, MTC is taking all of that on themselves to the extent that the plan is being implemented right now. But in the official implementation, it will require some funding from somewhere. Not clear where.
Thank you. I attended also, and aside from Board Member Powers' comments, I would also note that one of the actions that was brought up was wayfinding. And the entities that implement wayfinding were not at the table. That's going to be your local public works planning departments, whether it's county or a city. So I think that's something that we as council members and representatives, of unincorporated county, we need to communicate those to our planning departments when those implementation measures are known. I have worked in my day job on wayfinding projects, and there, the transit agencies or BART like them, but they don't plan them. So that's something to keep in mind as far as implementation.
If I may just add one point on that, because I think you're exactly right. Those entities will it's acknowledged that they will need to be involved. A lot of the wayfinding is, it's talking more about the internal within transit systems, but you're exactly right. Anything that's on the street will need to involve other agencies, and that is acknowledged.
Right. Anybody else have any comments on the presentation or provide any comments on the webinar today? Okay, seeing none. Again, this item is for information only, so we will see when the implementation plan comes out, and we'll stay tuned. Okay, the next item on the agenda is 2.3, and that's a discussion and presentation of the draft fiscal year 22 WCCTA Short Range Transit Plan.
Thank you. I'm going to take this one as well. I have a short presentation to go with this as well. So, I'm going to give a little bit of background on the short range transit plan, because we do have one new board member here, and we did bring this item to the board 2 months ago now, a draft version. All of the comments that were made at that meeting have been incorporated into the documents, plus a little bit of feedback from MTC. But MTC's comment pretty much was, this is what they were looking for, this is what they wanted to see. And so the goal for tonight is to have the board adopt our short range transit plan and have it submitted to MTC. And then I think it's worth mentioning, and I'll probably mention this later on in the presentation as well. At the meeting in November, I think it was Director Hanson suggested that we approve this plan, and then we come back at subsequent meetings and take smaller portions and have much more in-depth discussion on some of the decision points that the board may have to take over the next coming years, as we know a little bit more about our funding, as we make some decisions on our service levels and we see ridership coming back. So I think I'd still like to make that approach of, over the next few months, taking a topic and having a more in-depth strategic planning discussion with the board over some of these issues, because I think they are really important, and they're going to be something that we're going to have to figure out over the coming years. So what is the short range transit plan? It is a required document that we have to submit normally every 4 years to MTC. It makes sure that we're eligible for federal funding ultimately, and all of our other funding. It's a planning tool, pretty much. It's normally a very in-depth look back at how our routes have performed over the previous number of years. It gets into all of our performance metrics and gets into a lot of details on how the overall system is performing. That gives kind of the board and the general public an idea of where we are, how we're operating, what's our annual costs, the levels of service we have out there. And then there's also an element of future planning. It's a really useful tool to have in your back pocket when you're going after new money with project ideas. And it also has a multi-year funding outlook. Normally the planning horizon is 10 years. So it gives an idea of what our funding may look like, what our cost may look like over the next 10 years. This document was slightly different. It was only a 5-year planning horizon. And instead of doing all of the in-depth analysis and look back at how we're performing, and this is obviously due to COVID and all of the changes, MTC took a scenario planning approach. So we were given 3 scenarios with set funding amounts to come up with the amount of service that we could put on the street given those constraints of those funding. And ultimately, what I tried to do in the actual document is answer some of the questions that MTC posed with just some thoughts and ideas that the board will probably have to consider over the upcoming years as we do relook at our service, as we see where ridership comes back. I'll get into some of this as we go through some of the scenarios, but the three scenarios were a robust recovery, which would ultimately give us our funding levels that we were at pre-pandemic. A revenue recovery with fewer riders, which is ultimately the same as the first scenario, but less ridership. So it makes you think a little bit more about how we will provide service given our ridership changes, and also slightly less funding because our fare box would be affected. And then the third scenario is the one that you've probably read about in the media. That's the transit death spiral, BART are going to close every station every weekend kind of narrative that played out in the media over the last few weeks. So it's okay that the media did get hold of some of this information, but I think it didn't really tell the full story of what the agencies were trying to do when they submitted these plans to MTC. So that was my soapbox there. So the first scenario is the robust recovery. So I think this is ultimately, we have the same funding levels that we did pre-pandemic. That's a really great scenario to work with. But in the last 3 years, we have seen significant increases in all of our costs, and not just inflationary costs of all of the cost of doing business. But we entered into a brand new contract with MB Transportation for our operations and maintenance contract in 2020. So that's not really reflected in how much funding show up in this scenario. So what I tried to do with this scenario was look a little bit about what we could do potentially, how we could change some of our service. I think, the first one is we did suspend one of our routes, the JX route, back at the start of the pandemic. And we do have an understanding with the City of Hercules that we will ultimately provide transit service to the Hercules hub, to the waterfront area, as the city start to try and develop their all of the infrastructure down there to ultimately result in the Capital Corridor stopping at that location. So under this scenario, this is something that we would definitely look to do. We would look to reintroduce our JX service and expand it into the Hercules hub area. And then just the other 2 points, I'd probably have the potential restructure of local services on all of these scenarios. But I think that's something that we do need to start thinking about. And when I think about this, we have some routes like the Route 16 in Penole that goes all the way out into the valley. We have a couple of routes in Hercules that go up into the hills, that perhaps there's a different way of providing transit service to some of those communities. Not talking about cutting service, talking about different ways to actually provide that service, and microtransit, which is ultimately, the TNC kind of on-demand approach, could be something that the board would want to look at going forward. And we have some local routes that doesn't make sense, but there are some that it seems to make a little bit more sense. And then the other bullet point on here is the driver shortage, and that's there because it ultimately, at this moment in time, it doesn't matter how much funding we have to put out more service on the street. If we don't have enough drivers to operate that service, it's a real limiting factor on the amount of service that we can put out on the street. You've all heard about the driver shortage it's not new to anyone on this board. It's something we've talked about, and it's also not unique to our agency. It's not unique to the Bay Area. It's a transit throughout the whole country is having this driver shortage issue, and I think we're all kind of grappling with best ways to manage that. So scenario 2 is the revenue recovery with fewer riders. And a few of the items that I tried to bring out in the discussion in the plan are things about the span of the service day versus the frequency of service. When the pandemic started, we made a conscious effort to ensure that we still had service leaving our yard and operating out on the street at 4:20 a.m. every morning, and the last vehicle doesn't arrive back in the yard till just before 1 a.m. the following morning. So that's when I say span of service, we have vehicles out there on the streets providing essential workers, if you like, or providing people who need to use transit there for 23 hours of the day. And the result of that is we don't always have the frequency of service in other parts of the day. So it's a discussion that we probably would want to have with the board at some point. Do we want to maintain that 23 hours of service, or if that was cut back a little bit, that would mean we could potentially have more service in the middle of the day or more service around the shoulders of the commutes. So again, that's something I'm looking to get into all the details of today. It's just that this is the discussion that we would like to bring back to the board at a future event, so we can have a more in-depth discussion. Again, the same point about microtransit, just looking at how we do provide local routes, and then the prioritization of local and regional routes. And this gets back to the previous item and how we may want to consider our routes as being local or regional. And this also speaks to how our ridership is returning to our system. You know, I think I've shared, and the latest numbers seem to say our local ridership is now at 70–75% of where it was pre-pandemic. Our express service into the Del Norte BART station is just a little bit, maybe 50–55%, and our service at San Francisco is about the same. So there's definitely a discrepancy in how ridership has returned to the local service compared to the regional and express service. And obviously that may change as, you know, commute patterns settle back down, as people change their work and home habits. So that it's kind of an ongoing unknown, if you like, at this point, of how that's all going to ultimately play out. But how it does play out will probably want, you know, the WSCAP board to look at how we do provide some more service, and how we, you know, some of the funding that we use for some of the service we out there, could it be more equitably used or more efficiently used in different areas of our service? So yeah, just future discussions and things to start thinking about and having in the back of the mind. And then scenario 3 was the some progress, which there was no way to use the funding levels in this that didn't show a cut in service. So this would be how the board would then go about prioritizing where it may cut service. Again, would it be at the end and start of the day? Would it be during the non-commute where ridership is lower? And again, just thoughts about how we might reconfigure local and regional services. So that's the doomsday scenario that I don't think any of the operators envision will be a reality, you know, but it's something that we do need to at least have in our back of our minds and something to consider. So just some of the future plans, because the rest of the document does have a section about potential service changes we may make, or, you know, what we may want to look at. And there's also some discussion on capital projects that I included, because our capital and operational budgets are intermingled and tied together, and, you know, we can't do one without the other. So this is just a couple of points to, again, just to think about, but how we connect to the regional network and how we connect to the BART system and into San Francisco. There have been a number of studies out of WCCTA and CCTA about potential new regional destinations for service in West County. You know, Oakland's been looked at, and Emeryville, Berkeley, and potential for service from the Pinole area into San Francisco. And I think looking at pre-pandemic origin and destination data and how the traffic patterns work, they were things that we were starting to look at. And, you know, they've gone away because of what happened with the pandemic, but they may be something that come back to the board in future years. Again, the restructure of local service, and then the big capital element that is, you know, again, it's something that it's not unique to WSCAT, it's throughout the whole region, and the region is starting to put a lot of thought into how to transition to a zero emission fleet. Now we have the mandate that all of our fleet would need to be zero emission by 2040. And the mandate kicks in 2026 that we need to start purchasing zero emission fleet vehicles. So as our older vehicles come up for replacement, there's a lot of work to be done and decisions to be made about where we go. Do we go to the hydrogen route, which could potentially have less upfront infrastructure costs of needing to build hydrogen stations or hydrogen storage facilities, or do we need to immediately start thinking about electrification and how we would increase the electrical service to the Westgate facility, what all of that could mean. And that's kind of what staff are working on that in the background, and it's going on in the region. But it is something that is, again, it's coming up, and the costs associated with changing our fleet to zero emission and the potential service implications of that are something that we really do need to grapple with, because it all will play into not just our operations budget going forward, but our reserves and our capital funds that we kind of have access to. So kind of just a few little thoughts for us to think about. And as I said, I do plan on bringing a lot of these items back individually to have more in-depth discussions, and we can come up with some actual data and solid analysis about some of these, so the board can make proper discussions. And then so the next steps are just we are actually slightly late in submitting this plan to NTC. It was due on December 31st, but I don't think we're unique in letting that slide by a little while. I'm sure there'll be other operators that don't quite meet that deadline as well. And we just do need to continue to refine and work on our service plans, and just based on funding projections and in this ever-changing kind of transit environment. So with that, I'll happily answer any questions.
Thank you, Rob. Any questions of Rob on this? Any comments? Okay.
I see
guess-
Tiffany's hands. I see Tiffany's
Oh,
hands.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Tiffany.
First, Rob, thank you for going through this presentation pretty thoroughly. When we come back to have discussions about that, a couple of things. Of course, I'm very interested in extending transit to the Hercules hub, obviously. But in going through the other scenarios, in scenario 2, one of the things that I'll be really interested to talk about in terms of the span of service is the ridership, the distinct differences in ridership at the different times of day. And then also in scenario 3, with regard to the cost, the exploration of other sources of funding to lessen the impact on existing revenue sources. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Yes. Board Member Sasai.
Yes, just want to thank General Manager Thompson for the presentation and at least getting myself up to speed on this plan. One of the things that him and I talked about previously was an idea out of this plan, which was microtransit. And I think having a possible pilot program for that is an excellent way to sort of study how we can more efficiently adapt to dips into ridership in non-peak parts of the day, but also how we can slowly incorporate more zero-emission vehicles into the fleet. So I sort of have a question about what a micro-transit fleet would look like. How does it look like in comparison to our paratransit fleet in terms of rider capacity?
I think that's a question that I don't have a definite answer for, but I think we are separately exploring some replacement paratransit vehicles, and we are looking at some of the accessible van options that are out there that are more 2-3 people or 1 or 2 wheelchairs. So I think they're the type of vehicles we're starting to look at. And I think just in terms of microtransit, there's there's lots of companies out there that do this for other transit agencies. And I think they're we need to engage to come up with how, you know, the parameters, if you like, of how a pilot may work. And I think we are starting those. We've had a couple of real initial conversations, but they are something that we're, you know, starting to explore the idea so we can come to the board with a more defined kind of approach to that.
Great, thank you.
Board Member Adreno Chavez.
Thank you. This is a great presentation, Rob. I think that the stress scenarios, the 3 scenarios that I think MTC is asking you to provide, make sense. I just want to put some thought on. I don't know how after the pandemic we will be back into, you know, maybe full work weeks. Not all of the employers are going back. They will actually keep a hybrid schedule. However, if we're going to talk about equity, most of the service levels, service employment, you know, they have to be present. They have to be in person going there, and there's no more option sometimes than the buses. Another thing that I want to stress is the opportunities for education as well. So we do have the Contra Costa College shuttle, which is a great service. There is opportunities at Diablo Valley as well, and there is also a large employment center there. There is practically very difficult transit option if you want to take transit to that area of Pleasant Hill, in, you know, where the community college is. And again, you mentioned the Emeryville area, you know, the 4th Street, Berkeley, a lot of employment there. No direct transit option. If you want to be green and go, I mean, either you get a car that is hybrid or fully electric, or take maybe about 3 or 4 transit transfers to go there. So I think in terms of just look at those markets, and when the board is able to evaluate those services, I think it would be really good to have a good data, you know, supporting these services or these approaches, potential service. I don't know how these will play into this new network management that MTC maybe. So those kind of markets, analysis of markets that are not traditionally served by transit, in addition to the regional connections that everybody thinks about, you know, just going to the BART stations, which is great, but just thinking outside of the box. I really like your idea of the microtransit. We're also exploring that in Fremont in the work that I'm doing. So it's something that is good for when, you know, the suburban areas that are not really strong in transit ridership for the local destinations. So, well, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Just add one thing to the microtransit discussion, because I think it's worth mentioning that it doesn't work everywhere. It's been, you know, there's lots of agencies have tried it, and it doesn't work. That's why you need a company that does that, you know, every day of the week to come in, evaluate the system, and it makes sense. And I use this example anecdotally because 6 or 7 years ago, myself and Charlie, the previous general manager, sat down with a couple of microtransit companies at that time, and it made absolutely zero sense for us. That we were looking at a specific area of Pinole and the Tar Hills area, and the amount of vehicles and drivers we would need, it made no sense. Microtransit and how they think about it have come a long way in those 6 or 7 years. And, you know, I think there's definitely areas within our community that I can see areas of the Tri-Delta system. And, you know, as you say, Fremont's looking at, there's other areas now that have a lot of more similarities where microtransit works. I think that's why we're open to kind of go down that route and evaluate how it might work. And ultimately, again, just to go back to the whole reason why the Blue Ribbon Task Force was set up, we're trying to improve the rider experience. And if we can do that by adapting how we provide service. That's how we need to do it.
Great, thank you. Board Member Powers.
Yeah, along those same lines. First, thank you, Rob, for that presentation. And as the Terra Hills representative, I would appreciate the microtransit consideration again. But I want to kind of talk about the other part, which I think the board needs to keep in mind and keep coordinating with Alameda County on the express bus idea, to be able to have a bus that goes all the way from downtown Oakland to Hercules. I mean, maybe not the same bus, but at least the line. I know they're only considering now going up to basically the Hilltop area. But I think we need to keep stressing the importance of that express bus for the service individuals, for shoppers, for people, just to get them out of their cars. If we provide a convenient, fast service, I think, well, we would hope that people would pick up on it. So I just don't want to. The express bus wasn't mentioned expressly, so I wanted to make sure that we called it out and remember it as a board.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead, Board Member Adreno Chavez. You're muted still.
I think I mentioned it in a way of regional connections, but I didn't say exactly express buses. But I do agree with that. I mean, the express buses are something not to forget, especially for these markets that are not served by BART directly.
Right.
I think once you go beyond 2 transfers, people just get disappointed and just go into their cars again.
If they have that option.
If they have that option, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, with that, any other, oh, yes, go ahead, Board Member Sasai.
Yes, just a quick comment, just to echo what Board Member Andrino Chavez said about education when it comes to public transit options for community college students. You know, as someone who is a former student of Diablo Valley College, the Pleasant Hill campus, I used to commute there every day from Pinole to Pleasant Hill, and I don't recall receiving really much communication about public transit options for myself. And so I think that's something we can do better at.
Yes, thank you. Okay, any other comments, questions? Then we'll entertain a motion to approve the short range transit plan, so it can be sent off to MTC. Is there a motion?
Move to approve.
Okay, we have a motion by Board Member Adreno Chavez. Is there a second? And a second by Powers. Can we have a roll call vote, please?
Yes. Tiffany Grimsley,
Aye.
Maureen Powers,
Aye.
Tom Hansen,
Aye.
Cameron Sasai,
Aye.
Maureen Toms,
Yes.
and Aleda Adreno Chavez.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for that report, Rob. Okay, item 2.4. This one's going to be a mouthful. It's authorization for the general manager to enter into a contract with TransTrack to provide National Transit Database APC certification.
I'm going to take this one, and I'm going to try and not use any of the acronyms. I'm going to try and spell everything out so we don't. It may get even more confusing that way, but that's what I'm going to try and do. So this item is ultimately to do with our automatic passenger counters and how we will use the data that we get from them. So automatic passenger counters are small sensors that we have on board all of our vehicles, on all of the doors and ways of the vehicles, that ultimately count people getting on and off at individual stops throughout our entire system. Now, that in alone is really, really valuable data. If we had an ability to use that data and actually analyze it and, you know, look at trends about when people what stops people utilize. I mean, I mentioned Director Tom's earlier. I probably get asked at least once, if not 2-3 times a week, for how many riders get on and off at individual stops throughout the system. And we don't have any ability to provide that information. We don't have any accurate data. So ultimately, one of the outcomes of this project will give us that. But there's another, probably Yvonne would say, more significant elements to this project. And what the automatic passenger counters will allow us to do is replace the current way that we collect ridership data and then ultimately report to the National Transit Database. We have to report a lot of different data points to the National Transit Database. And one of the most difficult ones to track and get accurate, if you like, is what we would get through this process. The current process, we have a random number generator that comes out with a number, and each of our individual trips throughout our entire system, from that trip that leaves at 4:20 a.m., the trip that arrives back at 1 a.m., Saturday, Sunday, school trips, all of those can randomly be generated. And if that happens, the driver is given a piece of paper, and the driver is asked to manually report every single person who gets on and off their vehicle at each individual stop. And the way it's set up, that could be, that could be at any time during the day. And because most of our routes have an inbound and an outbound section, it could be that halfway through the route, the driver needs to remember, oh, I've got to count how many people are on board the vehicle, how many people are now getting off at each individual stop. And then when that comes back to Westcat, to our staff have to collate all of that information in spreadsheets. It's time consuming. It's obviously going to have errors in. There's a lot of expectation of our drivers to accurately collect that data, and there's no criticism. I'm sure they do a really great job, but just human nature and how that's set up, we're not getting the accurate information that we perhaps could. So the automatic passenger counters, as I say, can individually count everyone getting on and off the vehicle. In order for us to use that data, we have to go through a process of having it certified and validated. And we need to use a lot of software and ultimately a statistician to come in and help us validate that our random sampling is expanded out into a full ridership number throughout our entire service, throughout our entire year. So that's what this ultimate proposal that's before you today is to do. It's to give us the ability to use the automatic passenger counters to lessen a great deal of manpower and burden, both on the MV driver side and the MV operation side, but also just the Westcat admin staff and how we kind of go about this reporting element. So we did reach out. We had a number of conversations with a number of vendors. It's been we've probably been talking with a couple of these vendors for a couple of years at this point about how to proceed and which way to go with this. And our recommendation is before you today is going with the TransTrack, who are a company that we have been doing business with since 2013. They basically pretty much all of the data that is generated throughout our entire system, including fares, some of the maintenance systems and softwares that we have. Ultimately, all of that data is currently housed within the TransTrack system, and the monthly management report that is part of your consent calendar every month is generated through the data that's included within the TransTrack system. So one of our goals has always been to find a way to have all of our data flow into the TransTrack system. And sometimes that's through other software systems uploading data to it. And then sometimes it's actually working with TransTrack to utilize modules within their system to make use of the data that we can generate. And so again, that's what this proposal today is, that we would enter into a contract with TransTrack to set up the system to validate all of the data that we're getting from the automatic passenger counters. I say there is a pretty significant amount of work to get it through the National Transit Database certification. And that's where the bulk of the initial setup cost kind of lies. And because of the way our route is set up, we have to go through the process twice, because the way we report to the National Transit Database, the majority of our routes are included in one fixed route category in the reporting elements, and then our link service is classed as a commute route, so that has to go through its own separate validation and the whole process ultimately with Transtrack and with the statistician. So say we did speak to a couple of other vendors, and most of those other vendors would only provide the automatic passenger counter data. They would put us through the NTD certification process, but the end result would mean we would still not have the information tied into all of our scheduling information, all of our farebox information, everything that we're already getting in Transtrack. So, and then the other part of, because our automatic passenger counters are part of our automatic vehicle location system, this is where it starts to get really lots of acronyms and different words, but we get the added bonus of all of our on-time performance data being imported in the same kind of feed, and will also give us some more KPIs and some more performance measures that we will ultimately be able to present to the board in a more user-friendly format once we kind of have all the data up and running, and we can look at incorporating some of this into either into the monthly management report or as separate reports to the board. And it ultimately it will allow us as staff to track data a little bit better and analyze it more than we're currently able to. Currently, we have all the raw data and no real ability to analyze it and look at it. So that's part of what this system will also do. So in the staff report, there was a kind of a list of the services that this would provide, and I'm happy to go into more details on them. But ultimately, what we're looking for tonight is approval to enter into this agreement with Transtrack for an amount not to exceed $84,800. And that will allow us to implement this module, import all of the data, go through the training that's required for us as staff to use the data, and then go through the validation and certification process with NTD to start making much better use of this data. So happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Rob. Any questions? Well, or any comments? Yes, go ahead, Board Member Powers.
I hope I didn't miss this, but does it work via infrared beams or something? How does it? Did you say how it does the counting?
Yeah, it uses infrared cameras that cover not just a slice of the entryway and exit, but a large area, so it can tell heat sources moving in and or out. There are dual infrared cameras, both front and back, and then they are basically have the basic processing done through the AVL system, which just catches the count and then would be transferred into Transtrack to be cleaned up and turned into usable data.
I think
Does it assume?
I'm sorry, just to add on to that, because the cleaning was something I didn't mention. So if you think that all we're really interested in is ridership, actual passengers getting on and off the vehicle, if you can imagine how often a driver or a mechanic may get on and off the vehicle during the day.
Right.
And so that's also part of this whole software solution, and the statistician and all of that work. It's all done to figure out how many times drivers do get on and off, and at what time or what place they do. And then it could actually look at, so we actually just end up with actual ridership data. And part of the system also, if we're missing data on a particular trip, or the data doesn't make sense, there's a whole algorithms and cleaning process that, if at the end of the day it says that there's 50 people on board the vehicle, we need to go back figure out why that happened. And that's all part of what's in the software to help us analyze that and work out when it occurred and how we go about kind of correcting that.
Yeah, I don't want to go too far in the weeds, but two things. Does it assume that passengers who are coming through the front door are coming in and those through the back door are going out? So there's
No.
no.
No, not at all. It actually has enough of a thermal read area that it can tell if they are coming in to the bus as they walk across the field, or if they are going off the bus, walking the other direction across the field. And the computer
Okay.
itself can differentiate which direction the heat source is moving. And
Okay.
to an extent, it can even pick up if a parent is carrying a child, it can pick up things like that.
That's cool. So it does a little bit of imaging in a rough kind of way. So does the driver like punch a button when they go off, or how is that determined?
The infrared catches everything off and on for the certification process, and to be able to have TransTrack formulate all the data so that it can be made into usable data. There will be a testing period of a couple months where we'll take the data that the infrared catches, X amount of people on, X amount of people off, and then that data will be compared to actual video footage from our security systems on the buses, so we can verify, yes, this many people got on, this many people got off. Maybe there was an erroneous reading because the driver got off and got back on. Things like that will be noted, and that will design the algorithms that
Okay.
once we have enough samples, they'll be able to differentiate, within a reasonable expectation. They'll be able to differentiate people getting on and off, the driver himself getting off and on. If a passenger comes on, hops off for a second, gets back on, things like that.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's a bit of work, but it's worth it in the long run. It really is. Not just for the reporting and for being able to gauge stops, routes, and various things, but it will actually be giving feedback into our AVL system. So dispatch will have a live feed of a bus being full. Oh, sorry, we've reached maximum capacity. On our live map that dispatch has, the bus will change colors so they know, oh, hey, this bus is full. We can see it all still has X amount of stops to go. Maybe we should send something out to follow it. Things like that will also be very useful out of this live data.
That's
Super.
excellent.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rob. Go ahead, Board Member Grimsley.
This is a pretty random question, but Rob Petty, your example caused this question. Does a child being carried by a parent count as a rider?
That's something we get to decide basically as we go. Because like I said, that actually is a feature built into the hardware that we use is called from a company called Iris. And that is one of two companies that do support a true, they call it a head count because that's what they do. They look for an image of a head. So a parent carrying a child or something like that would show up, and then we would have to decide if we count that as a rider or not.
I guess maybe to answer the bigger question, yes, that is a rider. That is a rider in the definition of what we're looking for the NTD.
Yes.
So it's yes. So it's not a pay, it's probably not a paying rider, but it's a rider.
Great, thank you. I think this is really exciting. Having the data will really help on those previous two agenda items that we discussed, the short range transit plan, where we're going to have real data that shows, where we can maybe use micro transit, maybe where we need to, increase routes, all of that. And when I was talking to our general manager earlier today, he had mentioned that one of the affordable housing projects had requested data up on us for the bus stop on San Pablo Avenue. And I do know that when a city is considering, city or county is considering reducing parking on a project, the success of local transit is important. And so is when they're looking for financing, especially for affordable housing projects. The proximity to good bus stops is really important. So if there's no other questions, we can entertain a motion.
I move to approve.
Okay, we have a motion by Board Member Adreno Chavez. Is there a second?
I
I'll
second.
second.
I heard Tiffany Grimsley, Board Member Grimsley. Okay, with that, can I get a roll call vote, please?
Yes. Tiffany Grimsley,
Aye.
Maureen Powers,
Yes.
Tom Hansen,
Aye.
Cameron Said,
Yes.
Maureen Toms,
Yes.
and Aleda Adreno Chavez.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to move on to committee reports. General Manager report is first.
Thank you. So I just have a couple of items. I think firstly, I'd just like to express my thanks and everyone's thanks on the Westcott side for the work that MV have done over the last couple of weeks in the adverse weather. I think, really appreciate all the work that the drivers have put in, all of the operations staff, the road soup, dispatchers, maintenance. It hasn't been easy out there the last few weeks. And I keep asking the same question. Are you sure we're not cancelling more routes? Are you sure we're not more delayed than we are? Because they've been doing such a great job. They've been dealing with flooded bus stops, down trees, all of that. So I do want to just kind of express the appreciation for all that they've done, all that they do anyway, but especially over the last few weeks. It's been tough out there. Second item is our next meeting, our February board meeting, will be the last one that we can do in this format. We will have to go back to in-person meetings in March. So we have started the conversation again with the City of Pinole Chambers staff and Pinole TV. So that's a kind of an ongoing conversation about going back to the format that we did pre-COVID. Ultimately, there's not, I'm sure you're starting to hear this at your own city council meetings, that's the only real option. I think we will work with Pinole TV. If they are able to provide us their hybrid option, we could potentially still allow members of the public to use Zoom to access the meetings. But I think from a board member level and a staff level, we need to just start being prepared to come back to in-person meetings. So Yvonne, did you have something else before I have one last item?
It's just on top of what you were talking about with Pinole. I did actually have a conversation with Heather, who is the city clerk at Pinole today. And it was about that subject, about continuing to, going back to holding in-person meetings in the Pinole chambers. And she is going to be speaking with Dave Snell of Pinole TV, and we'll be having a conversation with them over the next month to make sure that that happens. I just wanted to update everyone on that.
Thanks. And then
Great.
the last item I want to do is kind of a sad item, I guess, in a lot of ways. This is going to be Director Aleda Andres Chavez and Director Maureen Powers' last meetings on the Westcott board. Both have elected not to be reappointed by the Board of Supervisors. So I just want to acknowledge that, Director Powers, we did a little bit of research. Director Powers, you started on the Westcott board about 15 days before I started at Westcott, around 16 years. And then Aleda, you've been on the board 14 years, but you also had 6 years as a staff member before I started. So there's a lot of experience, a lot of institutional knowledge kind of stepping aside. So I just want to acknowledge all the work that you've both put in over the years. It's been really appreciated. It's been great to work with you both. You know, you've both been supportive, informative, both when I was in all of my previous roles and in the last 6 months as the general manager. So I'm really grateful for all the work and support that you've kind of given us. And you're both going to be a loss to the board. And I hope you're both going to help us figure out with the Board of Supervisors how we can find a suitable replacement for both of you, because it's definitely, you know, losing 2 of you at one go it's going to be a big loss. So yeah, I just want to appreciate all you've done and thank you.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you, Rob. I actually, yeah, it's bittersweet, you know, reality, but I think it's time for new blood. I think I don't know. Did you say I was here 16 years? I don't know, or maybe less.
14.
14.
2008, you joined the board.
14 and then 6 years working as a staff. It's great. I know Tom Hansen. I mean, I think those 14 plus 6, that's the time I've known you, Tom. And still you have the award for the oldest, not in age, but oldest board member of the Westcott, on the Westcott board. So it's been a pleasure, a great job, great work that all of you do. It's an honor to be on a board, and also an honor to have worked at Westcott. Thank you. And I am not, I mean, please contact me if you, as I said, Rob, I'm open for coffee or tea in your case, isn't it? I have to start drinking tea because I'm a coffee person. So nice meeting you all. You guys are doing a great job.
Yeah, I'd like to say a word too. So I had the I really learned a lot on this board. Charlie came to my Lions Club meeting up in Crockett, and when he discovered that I was living in county, so I live in Terra Hills, he later on, when they needed a representative, he asked if I'd be willing to serve. And I have learned so much. I mean, it's been very exciting. I've been your representative to WCCTA for a number of years. I've been your representative to Contra Costa County Transit Authority as the small bus operator representative. Of course, I'll be stepping down from those as well. So I've had the opportunity to learn everything from the very most local, we're talking about microtransit, all the way to, how you interact with the whole county and then with the region. It's been a real education, and I very much appreciate it. I think Westcott, I looked around, Westcott is so well run. The staff is just amazing, and they have been forever. 15 years, my 15 years. The board is very responsible, and I just think that, and MV, of course, is outstanding. It's a great combination, and you guys just keep it up. So I'm actually resigning in part because I no longer live in Contra Costa County. I live in Oakland, so I really shouldn't be on the board anymore. So, but I'll come visit. I'll come to your board meetings. I'm still very interested in, like Leda, if there's anything like the history or anything like that, I can help you with, calling me. Okay. Thanks, you guys.
Thank you. I'd like to say thank you to both of you. You have both been incredible advocates for your communities, and, working with unincorporated areas, that doesn't always happen. So the Terra Hills community and the Rodeo community are really lucky to have you both.
Thank you. And Tom represents the Crockett area,
Yes.
Right? So,
and they are lucky to have him.
Yeah. Are we all appointed by federal governor?
No, Terra Hills is in District 1,
Oh.
and that's Supervisor John Joya.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
That wasn't the case when you were appointed Director Powell.
Correct.
The case now, yes.
Right. They've changed the lines, right?
You were probably appointed by District 2 Supervisor Olkema, maybe?
No, I think it was always federal governor I
Okay.
believe.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
If
So
could-
with,
I could say something real quick, because it's kind of hard to believe. I'm gonna miss both of you. It's kind of hard to believe we've worked together as long as we have. I mean, it seems like
know.
just yesterday we got started doing this, so especially later working on staff and then coming back, it's been a real pleasure, and I'm gonna miss both of you,
Yeah.
and really,
Thank you. We've seen a lot in those years.
yes, we have. The invention of the links, everything, yeah. We've done a lot of exciting stuff. So,
yes, indeed.
thank you for getting to work with
Yes.
you.
Thank you. So we'll move on to our WCTAC representative.
Okay, this is not a good way to go out, but I can't find my notes. So, and the minutes haven't come out yet, so I can't really, I can't speak to it. I apologize.
Yeah, I
Rob?
think there was some discussion about San Pablo Avenue improvements, but they really didn't touch our service area. I think it was further into Richmond.
Correct. Yeah, stopping at Hilltop.
Yeah.
Again.
Okay.
And
Thank you.
maybe just related to that, because now Director Powers and Director Adriana Chavez have stepped down, that does mean a change to our representative on the WCTAC board. And I spoke to John Nemeth, the executive director, today, and I also spoke to Director Hansen today, because the bylaws of WCTAC mean that the only eligible representative from Westcat to serve on WCTAC is a non-elected appointee from the county. So
Congratulations, Tom.
well, so I think we'll make that official at the next meeting, because again, we're changing in this. We're going to have to relook at our F&A committee composition as well. So I think we'll bring both of those items as actual action items at the next meeting. So I did tell Director John Nemeth that we may not have a official WCTAC representative at the January meeting, but we would have someone in place for February.
Great, thank you. Do you know what the timeline is for advertising to fill the two positions that are going to be vacated?
I think we have been in contact with the county already, and I think that it's now on us to follow up. And I actually had a conversation with our staff earlier that we're going to figure out a way to piggyback on to however they're going about their recruitment and put information out on our own. And I think I was being serious when I said I hope Director Powers and Director Adriana Chavez, if they have any suggestions from their communities, and also kind of put their names forward, because it's a big loss having five members on a 7-member board. So the more work we can do to find replacements as quick as we can, we're definitely going to be looking to do that.
Terrific. Thank you. Okay, moving on. Do we have any correspondence?
We do not, no.
Okay. Board communication. Anybody have any reports? Okay, seeing none, then we're going to be adjourned, and our next meeting is February 9th, and that will be our last remote meeting, 100% remote meeting. So with that, we're adjourned, and everybody stay safe out there in this crazy weather.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Good night.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.